When do cities hold elections? A U.S. dataset on election consolidation.
The best-kept secret of boosting voter participation is election consolidation. Moving local elections to the same ballot as national ones increases turnout more than any other election upgrade, often doubling participation in local races. Synchronizing elections is popular with voters, for whom it saves time and hassle. When asked whether to consolidate elections, voters almost always vote yes by large margins. Consolidation also improves representation of voters who are working age, renters, and less wealthy, dilutes the political influence of special interests, is more effective than unsynchronized elections in selecting local officials whose actions align with the wishes and beliefs of local majorities, enhances the accountability and legitimacy of local government, does not favor one political party over the other, nor any particular political ideology, and can save millions of taxpayer dollars. At present, though, a large majority of U.S. cities and towns hold their elections out of sync with national elections, a practice elite reformers started more than a century ago to dampen the influence of ethnic voters and their political machines. These off-cycle elections are relegated to a wide range of dates that are locked in by state or local laws. A trend toward election consolidation has emerged in recent decades and has picked up speed, with scores of cities rescheduling their elections to ride the turnout coattails of national voting and save money. Nationwide in the United States, more than 50 large cities, including almost all cities in Arizona, California, and Nevada, have consolidated their elections in the past 2 decades. In 2022 alone, a dozen localities passed ballot measures to move their voting to the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Until now, no one has assembled a reliable directory of when municipal elections are held in major American cities and what laws dictate those schedules. Consequently, leaders, journalists, reformers, and scholars have been hard-pressed to understand the dimensions of off-cycle voting or track its trends. This report presents and summarizes Citeline's Municipal Election Consolidation Dataset, a new dataset on election timing in all 50 U.S. states and the District of Columbia, and an associated interactive map. The dataset details what state law says about municipal election schedules. It also includes election timing information for 420 large U.S. cities, home to more than 102 million people. These cities include the 5 most populous cities in each state and all U.S. cities of more than 100,000 residents. By examining state constitutions and laws for all states plus municipal charters and ordinances for all these cities, Citeline identified not only when elections are currently scheduled but also the legal basis for those calendars. In other words, Citeline pinpointed what statutes leaders would have to revise to move elections from their disparate off-cycle dates to National Election Day. All but 5 states, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, New Jersey, and Virginia, conduct their state elections on cycle with national elections, and all but 10 states schedule all or virtually all county elections with national elections, according to scholar Sarah F. Anzia in her book Timing and Turnout. Election information website Ballotpedia recently studied school board elections and found a distribution of dates similar to what Citeline found for municipalities: 25 mostly off-cycle states, 14 mostly on-cycle states, the remainder a mix. This report focuses on municipal, or city, elections, specifically city council elections. A recent working paper from scholars at Boston University found a similar distribution of mayoral elections. In a smattering of cases, elections in U.S. cities are consolidated with or identical to those for county governments. Among these, for example, are Arlington, Virginia, Butte, Montana, Columbus, Georgia, and all cities in Hawaii. In these cases, cities follow state rules on county election schedules, which is to say usually on cycle. Where possible, Citeline also identified what steps would be required to consolidate elections in each city and whether action by state legislature, city council, citizen petition gatherers, popular vote, or some combination would be needed. The dataset, map, and report therefore serve as a detailed guide for how Americans can dramatically boost voter participation and strengthen their democracy.
Election timing in the states.
In almost half, 24, of the states, Rules requiring off-cycle municipal elections are baked into state law. These states, let's call them off-cycle states, include population powerhouses such as New York and Illinois plus all the Great Lakes states, most of the Deep South, and the northern tier stretching west from the Dakotas. In contrast, in 7 states, state law now requires that municipal elections coincide with national elections in almost all cases. We'll call them on-cycle states. These states are concentrated in the West and include Arizona, California, Hawaii, Nevada, and Oregon. In the remaining 19 states, state law allows municipalities to decide for themselves whether to hold on-cycle elections. Let's call them cities' choice states. They form a rough north-south line bisecting the nation and are scattered elsewhere. The 24 off-cycle states contain 138 of the 420 large U.S. cities in the dataset, including New York and Chicago. These 138 cities are home to 36 million people. At the other end of the spectrum, in the 7 on-cycle states are 117 large U.S. cities, including Los Angeles and Phoenix. These cities are home to 29 million people. Even in the on-cycle and off-cycle states, some cities are outliers. A few cities in off-cycle states, such as Raleigh and Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and Ann Arbor and Grand Rapids, Michigan, have special state permission to vote on-cycle. Just so, a few cities in on-cycle states, such as Tucson, Arizona, have special permission from courts or the state to vote off-cycle. Also marked with an asterisk are states where this study found no such outlier cities but where state law offers a small set of cities the option of voting on a schedule other than that prescribed for the rest of the state. In Mississippi, for example, state law allows certain cities incorporated before 1952 to vote on cycle, though none of the state's largest cities do so. Sightline categorizes states such as Michigan, Mississippi, and North Carolina, where only a few cities have permission to hold on-cycle elections, as off-cycle states. Just so, Sightline categorizes Arizona and California as on-cycle states, even though a few cities in these states are allowed to hold off-cycle elections. In the 19 cities' choice states, on-cycle elections are still outliers. In 13 of these states, including Florida and Texas, all or a majority of large cities hold off-cycle elections. In the remaining 6, on-cycle elections are the norm. 3 of these states cluster together with on-cycle: Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia. Among the 165 large cities in the 19 cities' choice states, only 64 cities have opted for on-cycle elections. For Arizona, California, and Nevada, allowing cities to choose on-cycle elections was a first reform step approved by the legislature. After these states each empowered cities with the choice, a trickle and then a stream of cities started consolidating their elections. Later, a decade or more after these states allowed cities the option to consolidate, they required most remaining cities to do so.
Election timing in large U.S. cities.
Shifting the unit of analysis from states to cities, a finer-grained picture emerges, as shown on this page of the municipal election consolidation map. Overall, among all 420 large U.S. cities in the dataset, some 239 cities, 57%, hold off-cycle elections. Some 138 of these 239 do so because of state law, the others follow local law. Meanwhile, among the 181 cities, 43% of all cities in the dataset that hold on-cycle elections, state law and local law also contribute in similar measure to election timing. Some 117 cities vote on cycle because state law requires it. The remainder made the choice for themselves through a municipal charter or ordinance. Aided by population giants New York, Chicago, and Houston, the first, third, and fourth largest U.S. cities, respectively, the 57% of cities that vote off-cycle account for a disproportionate 60% of the overall population of the country's largest cities. The remaining cities which vote on cycle include Los Angeles and Phoenix, the second and fifth most populous, respectively. Indeed, among the 9 U.S. cities with populations of more than 1 million, 3 vote off cycle by state law, 3 vote off cycle by local law, and 3 vote on cycle by state law. The pattern this report documents for large cities is indicative of the pattern for small cities and towns as well. In states that dictate municipal election timing, the same schedules usually apply to all municipalities. In states that let cities choose, smaller cities typically follow any default election dates set in state law or simply emulate the election schedule that major cities observe.
A growing trend.
For the first century of U.S. history, local elections bounced around the calendar, pushed this way and that by different parties and factions pursuing electoral advantage. Then from 1894 to 1917, the progressive movement seized on election timing as a tactic for smashing American cities, political machines, in which local leaders coordinated networks of patronage to hold power and mobilize ethnic voters for their political parties. The progressives' motives may or may not have been pure, but their record was mixed. They fought corruption partly by disenfranchising working-class voters. By severing city elections from national ones and scheduling them at odd times of year, they walled city government off from mass participation and made it a redoubt of elites, of an older, whiter, wealthier, WASPer, native-born homeowning class. It has remained that way ever since. Indeed, once off-cycle city elections had been enshrined in state law and city charters in the progressive era, they became conventional wisdom. Hardly anyone even thought about why local elections were not on the same ballots as state and federal elections. An entire culture of local politics evolved around off-cycle elections, and this culture suited incumbents well enough. A smaller electorate can be comforting to a politician who understands it well and plays to its predilections. By 1940, the progressive cause had prevailed almost everywhere. U.S. city elections were overwhelmingly off-cycle, according to scholar Dr. Sarah Anzia. Sarah F. Anzia, Timing and Turnout. How Off-Cycle Elections Favor Organized Groups, University of Chicago Press, 2013, p. 75. Half the states Anzia studied had exclusively off-cycle city elections, and more than a quarter had off-cycle elections in all but a few token cities. Add the numerous states where a majority of cities voted off-cycle, and only 3 had mostly on-cycle city elections: Indiana, Oregon, and Rhode Island. Indiana subsequently switched to off-cycle as well. As the 1900s continued, though, the tide began to run in reverse, first slowly and then faster. A trickle became a stream. Baltimore, Maryland, San Diego, California, Washington, D.C., Sarasota, Florida, Trenton, New Jersey, El Paso, Texas, all began voting on cycle. No single source of data captures the trend thoroughly or authoritatively, but 4 different databases point in the same direction.
Database of 18,000 city council elections.
A database of local U.S. elections published in early 2024 by Justin de Benedictis Kessner of Harvard University and Christopher Warshaw of George Washington University includes nearly 18,000 individual city council seat elections between 1989 and 2021. A preliminary analysis of this database by Zoltan Hajnal of the University of California, San Diego found that the share of these races decided in November of even-numbered years before 1995 was 13%. After 2017, that figure had almost tripled to 37%. Because the database was assembled with other purposes in mind, its accuracy on trends in election timing may be imperfect.
Database of 482 California cities elections.
As detailed previously, the share of Golden State cities with on-cycle elections may have been as low as 4% in 1940, but by 1995, after a steady stream of cities consolidating elections, it was 62%. Much better time series data is available thereafter, state-sponsored elections database. The on-cycle share rose to 96% in 2022 as 153 California cities moved to on-cycle. Though it only covers one state, this database is highly accurate.
Database of 1,600 cities elections.
A dataset assembled by Adam Dines of Brigham Young University and collaborators covers 1,600 U.S. cities of all sizes in the middle of the first decade of the 2000s. It estimates that 22% of these cities ran elections on cycle. Sightline compared these same cities' election schedule around 2005 with its own 2024 data for cities, the California 482 city database, and other sources. Citeline estimates that 140 additional U.S. cities, 9% of the total sample, consolidated their elections between 2005 and 2024. This DINES dataset seems as or more accurate than the 18,000 election dataset but less accurate than the California and Citeline datasets.
Database of 420 cities by Citeline.
Of the 420 cities in Citeline's dataset, some 378 were also in the DINES database. Of the cities for which we can make, then and now, comparisons between the mid-2000s and 2024, some 54, 14% of the total, moved from off-cycle to on-cycle elections. Most of the switchers were in Arizona, California, or Nevada, but Texas, Florida, and Virginia also had several each. Citeline's data, because it is more of a handmade catalog than a mass-produced database, is highly reliable, though it covers fewer cities than the other databases. All four databases show a trend toward on-cycle municipal elections. The trend has been especially strong in the U.S. West, where Arizona, California, and Nevada, once overwhelmingly off-cycle states, are now almost entirely on-cycle, joining longtime on-cycle western states Oregon and Wyoming. What will it take to accelerate this trend?
States' paths to consolidation.
States are the final legal authorities on city election schedules, so state legislatures are important arenas for reform. In Idaho, New York, Washington, and Montana, state legislators have recently considered bills that would consolidate local elections. In 2023, New York legislators approved and the governor signed a bill to consolidate county and town elections in November of even-numbered years. In most states, county elections are already consolidated with state elections. In New York and Pennsylvania, a constitutional amendment is required to consolidate city elections because election timing is specified in the Constitution. Reformers in New York are working to win such an amendment. In Hawaii and Kentucky, meanwhile, state constitutions specify on-cycle local elections. In Arizona, a different state constitutional issue has arisen, though its import is more limited than the explicit election timing provisions in New York and Pennsylvania's constitution. Arizona's state constitution grants unusually ample authority to cities with home rule charters. Tucson has won 2 cases before the state Supreme Court, arguing that these provisions exempt it from the state's election consolidation law. Such constitutional provisions may exist in other states. Citeline's dataset does not cover that question. In any event, such provisions only hinder legislators from making their states on-cycle states, not from converting off-cycle states into cities' choice states. Furthermore, despite Tucson's successful resistance, no other Arizona city has followed its lead. These other Arizona cities moved to on-cycle without objection when state law changed. In Washington, a 2024 bill that allows municipal election consolidation passed through 2 House committees, a House floor vote, and a Senate committee before dying without a vote in a second Senate committee. 2 different reform measures, both for mandatory election consolidation, passed in Montana's 2 legislative chambers in 2023. The 2 chambers failed to reconcile the versions before the legislative session ended, but proponents expect to try again the next time the legislature convenes in 2025. Idaho's legislature also saw an election consolidation bill in 2023, though like most pieces of legislation, it did not win time on its committee's agenda and therefore died unheard. Many other states considered election consolidation measures, 57 bills in 2022 and 2023 by one tally, and 14 passed into law, though they focused on other offices than city council or moved elections to dates with higher turnout but not to November of even-numbered years. For example, Idaho moved its presidential primary to the state's regular primary election ballot, and West Virginia pruned its calendar of special election dates.
Reversible partisan support.
The politics of election consolidation in state legislatures follow an unusual pattern. The polarization reverses with the state's partisanship. That is, in red states such as Arizona, Idaho, and Montana, election consolidation has been a Republican cause, opposed by Democrats, and in blue states such as California, New York, and Washington, it has been a Democratic cause, opposed by Republicans. Only in Nevada has election consolidation recently won strong bipartisan support in the state legislature. Given this pattern of reversing polarization, trifecta, states where the same party controls both legislative chambers and the governor's office, stand out as likely candidates for reform. 6 Democratic trifecta states and 12 Republican trifecta states currently ban on-cycle city elections. As noted, reform campaigns to allow or require on-cycle city elections are underway in some of these states, including Republican Idaho and Montana and Democratic New York and Washington.
Ballot measure states.
In 16 states, election consolidation could come through a ballot measure that members of the public initiate. All these states have a citizens' initiative ballot measure process through which voters can change state law, including law governing municipal election timing. In 9 of the states, state law currently dictates off-cycle municipal elections, and reformers could attempt to put a ballot measure before the voters. Because voters almost always vote yes on election consolidation, any petition that qualifies for the ballot is likely to win approval. In 7 other ballot measure states, state law allows on-cycle municipal elections. 3 of these states might be ripe candidates for petition drives to require on-cycle local elections. The other 4 states are less promising or more complicated. In Colorado, the state constitution would allow state law to encourage but not require on-cycle elections. In Wyoming, most cities already conduct on-cycle elections of their own volition, so statewide reform would do little. In the other 2 states, Alaska and Maine, term lengths would complicate election consolidation. In Alaska, city assembly members and mayors serve 3-year terms, and in Maine some serve 1-year terms. Synchronizing city elections to November in even-numbered years in these states would require changing not just election schedules but also term lengths, which makes reform a heavier lift.
City paths to consolidation.
Paths to reform are open at the city level in the 19 states where cities choose their own election calendar, either through council action or public vote. As noted above, some 101 large cities in these states currently vote off-cycle. Because voters almost always approve election consolidation when asked on the ballot, 21 of 22 times since 2015, a key question is which of these paths is available in which cities. In almost all the 101 large cities in question, city councils can initiate the move to on-cycle elections, though in many of them, the council does not have the last word. A key distinction is whether election timing is written in regular city ordinances or whether it is written in a city's home rule charter, if the city has one. States vary in the structure of their laws about charters, and consequently these documents' prevalence and contents vary state by state. City charters themselves also vary greatly in what they specify about election schedules and about the process for amendments. Often where election timing is in the charter, not just in the ordinance, the city council must refer changes to the voters for majority approval. Sightline's dataset specifies for almost all cities whether election timing is in the state constitution, state law, city charter, or city ordinance. It therefore serves as a guide to reform paths for almost all cities. In some states, state law specifies how cities may change their election schedule. Colorado says, for example, that local public votes are required to reschedule elections, while Florida, Minnesota, New Jersey, Texas, and Virginia give city councils authority to consolidate elections without a public vote. Overall, among the 101 large off-cycle cities in cities' choice states, some 80% have lodged their election schedule in their charter. These cities include Denver, Miami, and Minneapolis, for example. Changing charters is harder than changing ordinary laws, but charter amendments happen all the time. In the remaining cities, including Arlington, Texas, Gainesville, Florida, all cities in South Dakota, and St. Paul, Minnesota, the election calendar is in city ordinances, which city councils can always rewrite themselves. Meanwhile, in 32 of the 101 cities, local citizens' initiative ballot measures are legal. 3 of these cities, Wasilla, Alaska, Greeley, Colorado, and St. Paul, Minnesota, have the good fortune of coincidence. The election schedule is in their ordinances, rather than their charters, and there are municipal citizens' initiative processes. Residents of these cities can consolidate elections by initiative, even without city council support. In the remainder of these 32 cities, citizens bypassing the council to commence consolidation depends on whether the city's charter allows reform by citizens' initiative. Rules vary. Some allow and some ban amendment by initiative. In Seattle, Washington, for example, either the city council or a signature drive can put a charter amendment before voters. Sightline's Municipal Election Consolidation Dataset reports where election timing is lodged in law and whether cities have initiative processes but not whether charter reform is permitted by initiative.
Special cases, short-circuit primaries, winter runoffs, and annual elections.
Of the 181 cities that ostensibly vote on cycle, shown on this map, some 59 cities in 14 states employ peculiar election rules that squander some of the turnout benefits of on-cycle voting. For example, some 33 cities, including Los Angeles and Las Vegas, use short-circuit primary elections, that is, if a candidate wins a majority of votes cast in a primary election held before the November general election, the general election for that position is cancelled and the primary winner is automatically elected. The result is that in some races, the decision is made in a low-turnout primary, disenfranchising the more numerous November voters. In 19 cities, if no one in a November general election wins a majority, a subsequent runoff election ensues. Winners in cities such as Austin and Phoenix are then chosen in low-turnout runoffs, typically in December or January, by far fewer citizens than in November. One city, Raleigh, North Carolina, uses both short-circuit primaries and, when needed, runoff elections. Finally, in another 9 cities, elections are in November, but they happen every year. Their city offices typically have staggered terms. For example, in Arlington, Virginia, and Midland, Texas, some city council members are elected on cycle, by large electorates, and others are elected off cycle, by small electorates. In Wichita Falls, Texas, 2 cohorts of councilors serve staggered 3-year terms, and November elections only happen 2 in every 3 years. Some main cities have 1-year terms and annual elections, while others have staggered 2-year terms. One city, Odessa, Texas, uses both annual elections and, when needed, runoffs. In these cities, improving on-cycle elections would require methods that ensure November of even-numbered years is decision time for all city races, such as discontinuing short-circuit primaries, for example, and electing plurality winners in November or switching to top 2 primaries or ranked choice voting in general elections. Cities with annual elections would have to shift from council cohorts elected each year to cohorts elected every other year, for 2 or 4-year terms, which is the pattern in most U.S. cities.
A landscape of opportunity.
Sightline's new data on election timing and its legal basis in all 50 states plus the District of Columbia and in 420 large U.S. cities provide a detailed picture of the colossal opportunity election consolidation offers as an upgrade to democracy. The data also provides a map to winning that upgrade. In 24 states, the first step may be to allow cities to move their elections on cycle. The 18 trifecta states that ban on-cycle elections, 12 Republican and 6 Democratic, may be good places to start in the search for legislative action, though bipartisan adoption as in Nevada may be possible in any of the 24 states. In 9 of these off-cycle states, statewide citizens' initiative processes provide an alternative to legislative action. In the 19 states where cities are already allowed to hold on-cycle elections, it may be time to encourage or require on-cycle elections, as Arizona, California, and Nevada did after first allowing on-cycle elections for several years. State legislatures could take this step in any of these states. Several of the states are prime candidates for election consolidation through statewide citizens' initiatives. In the 101 large cities that currently conduct off-cycle elections within these 19 states, city councils can act without state government approval. Of these cities, 20% can pass ordinances to reschedule the vote, and in the others, the councils can initiate charter amendments to make the change, following their own state or local process, which often includes a public vote. Meanwhile, in 32 of the 101 cities, even if councils fail to act, citizens can spark change through city-level ballot measures of their own. Unfortunately, even among the 181 large U.S. cities that hold on-cycle elections, there is room for improvement. Almost one-third of them diminish the turnout benefits of election consolidation by using short-circuit primaries, runoffs after the general election, or annual elections. No action from state governments would be required to end these practices. Cities already hold authority to discontinue them. Across the United States, the rewards of election consolidation beckon: fewer, better attended elections, better representation of the electorate in all its dimensions, elected officials who better reflect their constituents' beliefs and priorities, stronger mandates for those officials to lead, thanks to turnout that's often doubled, less burnout and more turnout for voters who benefit from less hassle and less time wasted, more participation in democracy, and millions of tax dollars saved. The opportunities for upgrading democracy are many. Which states or cities will consolidate elections next?